So, shall I begin?
Yeah, so we will begin. I think we can also see many participants has joined the session. We also have the students, as we can
Okay.
see in the screen here. So without delay, we will start the program. Let me first take up this lecture series and introduce our association and the department as well. Good morning to everyone. I warmly welcome each and every one of you on behalf of the Department of Economics and the president and the executive members of the Economic Association on our second lecture series on the topic State Budget 2024-2025, a comprehensive perspective. I am Dr. Renbini Gikon, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Economics, Nagaland University, and also the convener of this lecture series, and also the treasurer of the Nagaland Economic Association. This lecture series is the second lecture series, as I've already mentioned, and it is usually we try to organize this lecture series quarterly in a year in the collaboration with Nagaland Economic Association and also the colleges and the universities with which institutions we collaborate in the next lecture series. We try to expand our scholarships and academic engagement to across all the academic and educational institutions in the state. And this our participants for today's lecture series are mostly the master students, undergrad students, PhD scholars, faculties at various universities and the colleges. Independent researchers are also here. We also have government officials and the practitioners with us in this series today, in this lecture series today. There may be also some participants who have joined for the first time with us. Therefore, I would like to take a few minutes and talk about NIA, Nagaland Economic Association. As we all know, began in the year 2019 with the present tenure holding presidentship by our Professor Dr. Kilangla Jamir, our HOD of the Department of Economics in the Nagaland University, and our General Secretary, Professor Zarantan Izung, and I as the Finance Secretary of NIA. We have begun this, it is humble, noble association in the year 2019. NIA is a professional association. It is also a non-political, non-governmental, and a non-profit organization which serve as a forum for articulation of economic and other developmental issues. We would also like to invite you all to join the association for any academic and research collaboration in the future at various capacities and possibilities. I'm sure we all are excited to listen to our speaker today, but before I give time to her, I would like to invite our head of the department and also the NIA president, Professor B. Kilangla Jamir, to say a few words on this event. Ma'am, the time is given to you.
Okay. Good morning to all of you. At the outset, I would like to thank the NIA Lecture Series Committee for giving me this opportunity and arranging today's talk on this very important and relevant subject, State Budget 2024-25, which is central for economic growth and development in the state. As we are aware, the state budget plays a very crucial role in socio-economic development process and governance of the state. It determines resource allocation across key sectors, directly impacting the state's development trajectory. Also, it reflects the government's priorities and goals, serving as a blueprint for development planning and project implementations. This also outlines the revenue generation through various sources, facilitating the financing of development projects and meeting expenditure commitments. Moreover, the fiscal discipline ensures responsible financial management, while transparency and accountability in the budgeting process allow for public scrutiny and effective utilization of funds for the benefit of the people. Overall, the state budget is instrumental in driving socio-economic progress and ensuring efficient governance through prudent financial management, lack of which has retarded the economic growth and development process in the state of Nagaland for such a long time. So today, with great honor and delight, we extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Srimati Nayandara Sasikumar, Indian Economic Service, Department of Planning and Transformation, Government of Nagaland, who will be delivering an insightful talk on the State Budget 2024-25, a comprehensive perspective. So the Department of Economics, Nagaland University, in collaboration with the Nagaland Economic Association, we would like to express our deepest appreciation to Srimati N. Sasikumar for graciously accepting our invitation. And I believe everyone present here will gain valuable insights from her expertise today through her talk. So thank you, madam, for your presence here today with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Now, may I take the privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker here, Srimati Nayandara Sasikumar. She is an officer of the Indian Economic Service, IES, and she is presently working with the government of Nagaland as officer on special duty in the Department of Planning and Transformation, Kohima, and is also the state nodal officer for implementation of sustainable development goals. She was also a fellow program in the management at IIM Kolkata. She has also been serving the government of India since 2012 and worked for the last 9 years with the Ministry of Finance, New Delhi. She has managed diverse responsibility, needless to say, predominantly focusing on international economic negotiations, financial market, and international finance. So let's not wait further, and I would like to give time to ma'am to take up the session for 40 minutes, and we will also have a Q&A session if the students are willing to ask, if you allow, ma'am. The time is yours. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Jamir and Dr. Kikon, first of all, and also the Nagaland Economic Association for inviting me to deliver this talk. So, I'm an officer of the Indian Economic Service, and as you would be aware, I would like to inform that Indian Economic Service is not per se, you cannot brand us as per se bureaucrats. We are basically technocrats. We work on the interface of academics, research, and policy. So we try to integrate whatever academic research or expertise we have into policy making. So here I would like to wear the hat of an Indian Economic Service officer, not per se of a state government officer. So I just wanted to clarify this. And I also want to articulate and discuss the Nagaland state budget with all of you. I think that's kind of my approach. And I also would like to say that I was not a part of the budget preparation team. So, when you ask the Q&A, I would like to mention that I am wearing the hat of a Indian Economic Service officer because I'm primarily a GOI officer, and I'm here on temporary deputation in the government of Nagaland. So thank you so much, and it's an absolute pleasure to be getting this chance to interact and engage with the academic community, the research community, and most importantly, the student community, the economic students community of Nagaland. So thanks a lot for that. So without much delay, I would just like to go into the presentation. I've got one presentation. I would just present it for a few minutes, and then I think we can kind of have a discussion, along the way, or maybe we can have a small Q&A session after the presentation. So let me just try to share my presentation now. Okay, so I hope the screen is visible to everybody.
Yes, it is visible to us.
Okay, so going forward, yeah, so I don't think we are all, somewhat related to economics, so I don't think we really need, but then it's always like when you are discussing the budget, it's always prudent to kind of go through the basics of what is the budget? It's an annual financial statement of the estimated receipts and expenditure of the government for that particular year. And as Madam Jamir has rightly pointed out, it's a very, very important document that shows the priorities and resource allocation of the government for the upcoming year. So it also helps us in understanding as to how the expenditure was done for the previous year as well. So, what are the key components of the budget? You have a revenue budget and you have a capital budget. Then you have the revenue receipts. When you talk about the revenue account, you have revenue receipts and you have revenue expenditure. So, revenue receipts generally includes the tax and non-tax revenues of the state, because we are talking about the state budget. So, I will just talk about the state budget. Then you have revenue expenditure, and revenue expenditure, the per se definition is that it's an any expenditure that does not create any assets per se, but includes operational expenditure, maintenance expenditure, expenditure for the day-to-day functioning of the government. And an important component of that is what we call the committed expenditure, which includes salaries, pensions, and interest payments on loans or borrowings that the state has already taken. Then you have the capital account, you have capital receipts and capital expenditure. So in capital receipts, the primary receipt, capital receipts is the debt receipts, which we call the borrowings of the government, the state government. And then you have non-debt capital receipts as well, which does not create any debt on the government. Then you have
Ma'am,
capital.
sorry to intervene, but
Yeah.
I think if you are trying to move the slide, the slide is not moving. We're still in the first slide.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So how do I rectify that? Anybody has any idea?
You can just put the screen in the full screen in the PPT.
Okay.
You put the screen in the full screen first. Okay.
Okay, let me try this.
Yeah. You can click on your extreme left. There is in the bottom there is something like a jar kind of shape is there. You can click there, which is on the icon, the fourth icon on your
Okay, let
extreme
me try
right.
once again. I'm just coming back.
Yeah. The slide is moving now. We can see this we are in the
Oh,
second slide
oh,
here.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, but when I'm doing a slideshow, I think you're not able to see it, is it?
Yes, I think there is something technical glitch over
Yeah.
there, but it's okay. We can see.
Let me just try once
You can
again.
just try if the slide is moving.
Okay. Is it moving?
No.
Oh, okay. So, okay, I think maybe if everybody can see it, and I think I'll just
We
proceed
can
like
see this
this.
is fine. If the slide is moving, then it is fine, ma'am. Yeah,
Yeah. I hope this is okay. This is actually the edit view,
yeah,
but that's okay.
yeah.
I'll just read out
That's
from
okay.
here.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
That's
you
fine.
have
Yeah.
capital receipts and you have capital expenditure, which is those expenditure that actually enables the creation of assets or creates assets like buildings or any kind of major infrastructure, and these are the capital expenditure. And then you have the concept of fiscal deficit, which is an excess of total expenditure over the total receipts. And the budget is usually in the form of a consolidated account, contingency account, and the public account. But here, from a public point of view, I think the consolidated account is the most important one, because that is where you have the revenue budget and the capital budget, and all the expenditure is always from the consolidated fund of the state. So moving to the next slide, this is the Nagaland State Budget 24-25. So the budget for the next financial year, which I mean the financial year that has already started from the 1st April, has been presented by the Honorable Chief Minister in the Assembly on February 2024. So what are some of the key highlights of the budget is that the gross state domestic product of the state is projected to be rupees 48,375 crores. So we have a there is a total expenditure budgeted to be rupees 19,485 crores. There's a total receipts budgeted is rupees 18,025 crores, and we have a fiscal deficit, which is E minus R, which is 1,450 crores, or a budgeted fiscal deficit of 3% of the GSDP. So you can also see the graph that there is a shortfall of receipts and expenditure for the Nagaland government. And these are some of the summaries of the key figures in the budget 24-25. So since the focus is on the recent budget and the recent budget that has been allocated for the upcoming financial year, I will just read out the basics. So you have a net expenditure, you have a net receipts of 18,035, you have a fiscal deficit of 1,450 crores. And then on the revenue account, we have a surplus of 1,141 crores. Then we have a primary deficit of 82 crores. So primary deficit is basically fiscal deficit minus the interest payments on loans. So because that's kind of a committed expenditure that you already have, the primary deficit gives you an idea of the fiscal deficit, and when you deduce the interest payment on loans from the fiscal deficit. So lower the primary deficit, it's better it is for the state, because then that shows that when you remove the interest payments, there's not much of a shortfall for the state. So the things to be noted here is that in the revenue account, there is a revenue surplus estimated to be 1141 crores. And there is an 8.7% increase in receipts over the revised estimates for 23-24. So for the upcoming year, the government is expecting an 8.7% increase in the revenue receipts. Then you have a detailment of the expenditure budget for 2024-25 and details of the committed expenditure. So you have the different components of the expenditure budget. You have the revenue expenditure. This is why I mentioned this before. You have revenue expenditure, you have a capital outlay, then you have loans given by the state, which is practically nil. So basically the expenditure budget would basically comprise of your revenue expenditure and your capital outlay, resulting in a net expenditure of 19,485 crores. And this revenue expenditure also includes something called the committed expenditure, which includes the salaries of the government of officials, the pensions that is due to be paid, and you have the interest payment on loan. So these are all kind of things that are a little rigid, or which cannot be really tweaked about a lot, because these are all expenditure that is being committed by the government. So that is around 12,177 crores. So one thing to deduce from these figures is that the committed expenditure for the government at 12,177 crores is around 72% of the revenue expenditure. And this forms a major chunk, around 68% of the revenue receipts that the state has received. Then this table gives a sector-wise expenditure under the Nagaland budget 24-25. So this is only, this is not a very comprehensive kind of a table, because I have seen that there are more allocation, but I think basically they have just captured those sectors which comprise about 58% or something of the allocation. But only thing which struck me in these allocations is number one, there seems to be an increase in allocation to irrigation and flood control. There seems to be a 40% reduction in allocation to roads and bridges, and this is despite the fact that in the 23-24 revised estimate there was a quite a jump in the expenditure in 23-24 on roads and bridges, but even then the budgeted expenditure remains at 742 crores. And another thing is, I've been reading an analysis which says that the allocation to health and education sector by Nagaland is, kind of lower than the average allocation by, all the other states of India. So I think this I found as an interesting point. Now that we have seen a little bit of the expenditure, I think we would now come to the receipts. Like, where does all the revenue come from for the state of Nagaland? So I'm just reading out for the 24-25 budgeted receipts. So you have a state's on tax revenue. We would also go to a breakup of that in the later slide. of 1,787 crores. Then you have the state's own non-tax revenues of 464 crores, and this mainly comprises of, the fees or charged on various services, and these are the kind of non-tax revenues that usually comes to a state government. Then, for every state, there is an allocation from the central taxes. So, this allocation is decided by the Union Central Finance Commission. So, in fact, the 16th Finance Commission is just going to be formed for deciding for the next 5 years as to what would be this. And this is usually based on a formula that the Finance Commission you comes into. So based on that, so the previous Finance Commission recommendations, Nagaland has received 6,941 crores as a share in the central taxes. And then we come to the largest source of Nagaland's receipts, which is grants in aid from the center, which is 8,843 crores. And we have a revenue receipt of 18,034 crores. And I mentioned that there was some non-debt capital receipts also that you receive, primarily from disinvestment of government stake in certain PSEs, and these are what creates non-debt capital receipts, or any receipt that does not create a future liability for the government. So that again is around 2 crores. So when you deduce the revenue, the non-debt capital receipts from revenue receipts, when you add the non-debt capital receipts, revenue receipts, you have a net receipt of 18,035 crores, and this forms the state government's receipts. Now, what can we deduce from here? The one striking point is, of course, that 88% of the state's total revenue receipts comes from the center. Two major heads, basically. This is the share in central taxes, and then you have the grants from the center. And 12% of the revenue receipts comes from the state. This forms the own tax revenues, state's own tax revenues, and the state's own non-tax revenues. And this is around 3.7% of the GSDP. So as I mentioned, so state has its own tax revenue. So the state's own tax revenue, the major categories which form the state's own tax revenue is the GST, the sales tax, VAT. You have taxes on vehicles, taxes and duties on electricity, you have the state excise, you have stamp duty and registration fees, and you have land revenue. So even here, you can say that state GST is the major source of own tax revenue. Around 68% of the own tax revenue comes from the state GST. So the state also has a central GST allocation as well. This is not included here because we are talking about the state's own tax revenues. And then sales tax, what forms around 17%. And then taxes on vehicles is also one major source of revenue, on tax revenue for the Nagaland state government. Now that we have discussed the receipts and expenditure, we would now just look at the, what you call the fiscal sustainability or the fiscal position of the Nagaland government. So, fiscal position, three things. There has been a revenue surplus of rupees 1141 crores. That is in 24-25, it is budgeted. Then fiscal deficit is budgeted to be 3% of GSDP, and this is very much in line with the fiscal responsibility and budget management targets. But one interesting point to note is that, the fiscal deficit was budgeted to be 3%, even, if you just go back to the slide. So fiscal deficit was budgeted to be 3%, even in the budget estimates of 23-24. But then when it came to the revised estimate of 2024, you can see there has been a jump to 6.1%. So I think that is also an interesting point to note that, there is a kind of difference that is emerging from the revised estimates and the budget estimates. And usually, when this happens, you need to take that into account when you are budgeting for the next year. So it remains to be seen, like for 24-25 revised estimates, how much the fiscal deficit comes to be. But as of now, this is very much in line with the targets that the state has to achieve in terms of showing, prudent fiscal responsibility. Then you have another parameter for fiscal or assessing the financial position is outstanding liabilities as a percentage of the GSDP. So you have an accumulation of total borrowings at the end of a financial year. So it is a total accumulated figure of total borrowings. And the outstanding liabilities at 38.6 percentage is estimated to be lower than the revised estimate of 39.6%. There's not much of a difference. And you can also see that over the years, there seems to be a decrease in the outstanding liabilities of the state government. And apart from this, there is also something called outstanding guarantee, which is not included in the outstanding liability, but this is also a liability of the government. This is basically for guaranteeing for loans or anything taken by the state public sector enterprises against financial institutions. So that there is a figure of around rupees 190 crores when you talk about liabilities of the government. So this forms a basic kind of an analysis of the state budget. Now we come to the major policy highlights. So when you go through the finance minister, the chief minister's announcements in this year's budget, four things basically stand out as new, projects or new things that have been announced for to be implemented apart from the ongoing programs or ongoing allocations. So something new with a certain policy objective in mind. So one is the development of an integrated business hub in Dimapur. So as you know, the state is very much in sync and trying to attract investment opportunities, corporate social responsibilities. It basically wants to woo the private sector to set shop in Nagaland, and this is one important step towards that, on projecting Nagaland as a state that is friendly to business. And at the national level also, there is a lot of rankings on in terms of business environment and startup ecosystem, and how much you are progressing on those lines. So Nagaland also cannot stay behind on those matters, because there is a national assessment also which takes place, and also for the state's own benefit. So there is going to be an integrated business hub in Dimapur, which with already it will have all kinds of facilities, and you just need businesses to come and start their enterprise in Nagaland. So this is a move towards that, which this is what I reckon that this must be the objective of the government. And then one announcement has been the chief minister's life insurance scheme. As you must be aware, like in the previous budgets, it has been announced the chief minister's microfinance initiative, the chief minister's health insurance scheme were two major projects that were announced, and they are ongoing. So one, on the similar lines, another project that has been announced is the chief minister's life insurance scheme, which aims to provide a rupees 2 lakh coverage to any person, any family in Nagaland who has, on the event of a death or demise of the breadwinner of the family. And there are other specifications as well. So in the event of accidental or disability, or around, I think around 15 crores have been allocated for this particular life insurance scheme. Then you have a skill training center for the construction sector. So skill development is also, as far as I understand, one priority for the state government, because it is important to equip the populace, the youth, with adequate skills so that they can find jobs and they can create jobs and contribute to the economy. And then another notable, announcement which I could find was the e-stamp system. So they are going to replace the use of physical stamps in registration of properties and deeds. and this primarily has been introduced to basically make the whole system online and to curb the evasion of payment of stamp duty on transactions that do take place. And so that is the e-stamp system. So these were the major policy highlights that I could find in this year's budget. um, Moving on to the issues and perspectives, I think, if you look at issues, there would be a lot more which we can keep discussing this till the end of the day. But I've just tried to cover more, some issues and perspectives that immediately strike you when you look at the Nagaland State Budget 24-25. So the one point that, as I mentioned before, is the single most striking point is that the essence of a budget is the receipts and it is the expenditure. So in receipts, it's important for states to have their own revenue generation sources so that you are not dependent on the center. Because when you're dependent on the center, what happens is that the central allocations are mostly based on formulas. They cannot It's very rarely that you can actually give a lot of discretionary grants to a particular state government, and states are expected to have their own sources. So when you based on formula, there's a lot of criteria that comes in. So it may so happen that the specific issues or a local issues of a particular state may not really be the at the topmost priority, because when you deal with so many states, so it might not be possible to increase the grants or share of allocation of taxes in a very regular basis by the center. So this becomes important that the state needs to generate its own tax revenue. So right now state's own tax revenue at 12 percentage is, as of the total revenue receipts, is limited, and there is a dependence on central grants and tax shares. Then you have you know that is the receipt side, the striking point on the receipt side. From the expenditure side, there is a huge proportion of committed expenditure and administrative services, which form like a lion's share of the revenue expenditure for the state. So what happens is that when you have this kind of a obligation, it limits your other expenditure priorities or capital expenditure, because the state is limited by its own resources when it comes to determining its priorities. And it is important to have enough resources so that you can decide on where you can best allocate those resources. So number one, when you have a large proportion of committed expenditure and large proportion of expenditure that is going into administrative services, it limits your other expenditure priorities. And number two, it takes away a huge chunk of your revenue receipts on which you're already dependent on the center, which is kind of rigid and it cannot increase beyond a certain point. Another point is sectoral allocation to social and economic sectors is low compared to general services. Point number four, when it comes to fiscal sustainability of the government, is Nagaland fiscal deficit a matter of concern? As of now, no. But then again, as I said, it remains to be seen how much the revised estimate of 24-25 fiscal deficit comes out to be, and how the expenditure which has been budgeted is not enough, and there seems to be more expenditure requirements for the state. And then it remains to be seen whether you can actually retain that position of fiscal sustainability. And as of now, the financial position in terms of public debt and outstanding liabilities have not been, there's no alarming trends that can be seen. It kind of remains static. But then, as I said, it's important that you take account your actual expenditure requirements when you're budgeting it. So this is one issue that I have seen. Now going to the way forward. Uh, so now that we have all those issues, what is the way forward? It is to raise state's own tax revenue. How do you do it? Either you can increase the sources of tax revenue, or you can increase the efficiency of tax collection for the already existing sources of revenue. So there is more scope for increasing revenue generation, apart from GST and all those which is already there, revenue generation from electricity, excise, land revenue, and stamp duty. So it is at the point of stamp duty that the government seeks to strike when it has introduced the e-stamp system in the recent budget for enhancing revenue generation by curbing tax evasion and by kind of having an online documentation of all registration of properties so that nobody can evade the system. And another, when you talk about the state budgets and state finances, a major source of revenue in other states is the state excise duty. And but in Nagaland, there is a prohibition on liquor, so that is as of now is not a source of revenue for the state. But then when you talk about other states, I mean, there is other states do, have for them excise duty forms a huge chunk of their own revenue receipts. That is when you talk about tax revenues. Then you can also boost non-tax revenues. Non-tax revenues are basically those kind of fees and user fees that you charge for any of the government services or public services, municipal fees, power sector fees, and all that. And there is like the State Finance Commission has recently released a report where it has extensively talked about the need for revamping the power sector, for improving the revenue generation for the state. And I think there is a huge scope in the power sector. Like even when you look at the revenue of the state government of now, you would see that power sector contributes a huge chunk of the non-tax revenues. So if you just target that single sector and improve the efficiency in generation, transmission, and distribution, uh, I think substantive improvement in the revenue position of the state can happen from there. The other point, so that is about increasing your revenue. Then the next point about prudent fiscal management is about streamlining your expenditure, so reduce your revenue expenditure. So I think another recommendation of the State Finance Commission was also about forming an administrative reforms committee, by which I strongly also feel that if the state should implement this and look at the entire administrative system in its entirety and suggest a few administrative reforms with a view to streamline its committed expenditure. Then another possibility is for increased central government grants. So as I said, the central government does have the certain discretionary grants can be provided either within the aegis of the Central Finance Commission or outside the Central Finance Commission through sectoral grants or from the from the ministries or from the union ministries. So this is definitely an option because as the nation is also progressing, they would also definitely be revisiting the position of grants and all that. So increased central government grants can also be a way forward, which the state should also be trying. Uh, Coming to the now that's about increasing your pie of the the resources, but within your existing resources also, I think sectoral allocation should be given and prioritized in certain economic sectors like agri, allied, industry, and services, which forms a major chunk of the Nagaland's economy even today. So boosting the service sector and creating more forward linkages for developing the economy would definitely go a long way in increasing the the sustainability of the government. So sectoral allocation may be increased in economic sectors which with a lot of forward and backward linkages in the economy. And finally, fiscal sustainability studies, I have not seen much of that because that is also because, Nagaland as of now does not seem to be in an unsustainable fiscal situation. But there is a need for, study of projections in terms of, where we stand in terms of financial position vis-a-vis other states, vis-a-vis the center. And you need to understand the debt sustainability position of Nagaland, and it's only then that prudent fiscal management can actually take place. So that was the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Nayantara. That was really an in-depth, insightful, and an excellent presentation. We can see the hard work that you have done, an in-depth analysis and the study to prepare this presentation. And I'm sure there is a lot to discuss and to think about as a scholar, practitioners, and as an academician. I'm certain that all of us who are gathered over here today must have benefited from this lecture. If you allow, ma'am, shall we take some few questions? If there's any question that our students or the participants who have joined online would like to take time.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, thank you. You can also type your question in the chat box if you are finding it difficult to unmute yourself. May I call the students who are in the hall can also ask the question. The student can come forward. Okay. Whoever has a question can quickly come forward.
These are all students from the Nagaland University, or do we have other colleges as well?
These are students from Nagaland University. They are mostly masters and PhD scholars in the
Okay.
hall. We also have students and faculties from different universities and colleges who have joined us across Nagaland over here.
Okay.
There is, if you may also view the question in the
Yeah,
chat
yeah,
box,
sure,
ma'am.
sure.
There is a question from one of our PhD scholar. He's asking, what is your view on the state petroleum reserve? Do you think that it would generate sufficient tax or non-tax revenue for us?
That is definitely a issue to be discussed because the state does have petroleum reserves. So I remember attending a lot of meetings where these issues have been discussed, and there is quite a lot of interest in refineries and as you are aware, like at the national level also we have a lot of petroleum exploration and refineries who have made an impact at the international level, and they are interested in tapping any kind of reserves that are there. So this Nagaland state also has sufficient, not sufficient, but it does have substantive petroleum reserves. But I think there are some issues, some interstate issues also which need to be worked out. So that kind of discussions are going on. I think the state, as far as I know, the state has prioritized this because it would generate revenue, and I think it would generate certain royalties which I reckon would come under non-tax revenues. So states with such reserves of petroleum reserves have royalties received from exploration of these reserves as their major source of non-tax revenue. So that's one thing that Nagaland should definitely explore when you talk about increasing your share of revenues. Yeah, so thanks for that.
Do we have any more questions? You can unmute the system from the hall and you can ask the question if there's any question. Sangmo, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. If there's can you just help the students if there's anyone who is willing to ask a question? If there is none, then we can go ahead.
Excuse me. If there is no other question,
Uh-huh.
just I would like to share one point which the speaker has just rightly pointed out, that the state, when we talk about the revenue, the state government here, only 12% comes from the own source, and 88% we depend on the funding and as such. So here the thing is, the speaker has rightly pointed out that um, this one of the sector where we could have generated a good amount of our own tax was is the excise, where
Yes.
we have a problem with the prohibition act. So here, what I would like to point it out is there any way that this can be brought? Is there any through any way we can brought this under the tax system, under the embed of the tax system, so that we can generate some resources? Because we know that though prohibition act is there, but the liquor that is flowing into the state, it is quite huge, and only the black marketers, they are being benefited, whereas the state government is losing a lot here. And whereas other state, as the speakers rightly pointed out, that other states, they are generating a high proportion of their uh, taxes from this source. So since the liquor is flowing into the state, is there any way that the government can bring it under the ambit of the tax control? So that is one thing. And another thing, what I used to think often is that water is a real problem everywhere in all the downs and the cities. We purchase a lot of water. So if the public water supply system can be improved, thereby the state government can also generate resources, its own resources. That can be one of the option. At the same time, by improving its water supply, the welfare of the people will also be increased, because we are paying lots of money. Every household is paying a lot of budget on water supply. So we are buying from the private sources. So if the government can improve its water supply system in the towns and the or urban areas especially, then there also government can generate its own resources. That is another source. Since, madam, you are at the realm where you can influence the decision makers at the higher level. So I think if you can take note of this, then that would be very good. That is just one suggestion I'd like to give, and you can keep that thing in your mind when you have discussion with the uh, right authority at the right
Yeah,
forum.
sure.
So that is just one suggestion. And
Yeah.
another thing what I feel is that the sectoral expenditure, the shares, when we look at this thing, then 23, 24, only agriculture and education, sports, arts, and culture have a positive expenditure, whereas the other sectors, almost all the other sectors like health, service, urban, and all those sectors have reduced their share of expenditure. So what I feel is that that is also a matter of concern. Of course, increasing the proportion of expenditure on agriculture, education, these are welcome. But when the share of public expenditure on health services, etc., then that is also a matter of concern. And that is happened when we look at the last year's expenditure.
Yeah.
So only those things I would like to highlight. And if you can take into consideration when you are in the discussion with the right authority, then it will have an impact on the
Sure.
state economy. Just what the suggestion I'd like to give.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks a lot for the suggestions, Madam Rabir. These are very, very relevant suggestions, and I can always try and influence. We can only try, but
Yes,
we will
yes.
always
Thank you.
keep trying.
I'm sure you can make an influence.
Yeah. So, to the students also, I would like to say keep reading about the Nagaland economy, the Indian economy, and have an active interest and be very active debaters and participants in your own society, because it is not just the government's job, it's also your job to understand these things, as postgraduates and doctoral students of economics, to have these kind of insightful discussions among yourself and give policy suggestions, I think the Nagaland government would definitely benefit from these things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. But before, I have also learned that you have another presentation to move on, but I am kind of becoming greedy to take another 1 more minute from you, since you are also the nodal officer for the implementation of the SDG goals
Yeah.
in Nagaland. If we see the present BLFS data, the female workforce participation in the urban regions are declining in Nagaland. So, given the SDG goal 5 of gender equality, what, in your perspective, can you give some perspective or your experience, or maybe some of the thought-provoking issues that you have maybe come across in the Nagaland government through this planning or through your experiences? How can we achieve gender equality in the workforce, and also in Nagaland, how far we are to achieve the SDG goals 2030? If you can also maybe highlight some to our students, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, sure, sure. See, female labor force participation is not just an issue in Nagaland, it's a national issue. It has been debated a lot of times. And some of the debates say that, the female labor force participation is quite less because of, there is an increase in education because a lot of women go for higher studies rather than entering the labor force. Or so which is also a good thing because that means that there is a mobility that is happening and they are aspiring for higher level jobs. But I feel that there are always a lot of social factors also that constrain the participation of women, and also in Nagaland and in India as well. So these social factors also need to be understood, and if you look at other major international countries like developed countries and all, they focus a lot on so many things like early child care system and how to improve the facilities of early child care so that women who had once been a part of the workforce and then they have to leave the workforce because of maternity or child care reasons, and then they find a gap in their resume and they're unable to come back. And I think that also forms a major chunk of the kind of women who are left the workforce in India. And I'm sure this is an issue in Nagaland as well. So for every working woman, what you need is a good supportive working ecosystem in the private sector as well as in the public sector. So, when you have a small private sector in Nagaland, but even then, I think there should be enforcement of regulations which promote and support the, employment of women. There should be stipulations that you should have a minimum certain number of women employees in the private institutions as well as in the public sector, in academic community, in the research community. I think if you support and promote them, it is not just enough to have stipulations, because what is happening is that even when you have those kind of things and women enter the workforce, it is difficult for them to maintain
Yes.
their employment because of a lot of constraining factors. So it is here that other measures need to come in, like need for early childcare and how, for example, in Nagaland, I've been visiting a few villages and I've been visiting the Anganwadi centers, and in some places I found the Anganwadi centers to be closed
Hmm.
for without any reason. So then how will those women who are supposed to be working so that their kids are taken care of in the Anganwadi, and what is actually happening to them if the Anganwadis are not functioning properly? you know
Yes.
and then
Yes.
the wages to women, the pay gap that is there
Yes.
for
Pay
women
parity.
employees vis-a-vis the male employees. I think if those kind of things are all taken into account, then definitely there would be a lot more women who would be participating, and this in turn would lead to better economic output. And this is an issue which is not just relevant to Nagaland, it is relevant nationally as well. And even at a national
Yes.
level, I feel there's a lot of lacunae in those kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
policies. So I think if Nagaland could also be a front runner in that, I think that would be great.
It is, it is. The pattern is becoming similar now. Earlier in Nagaland, we have more women labor force participation, but both in the rural and the urban. But now we see in the rural, it is increasing massively, particularly if you see sector-wise. In the agriculture sector, it is increasing, but in the urban, the female labor force participation is surprisingly decreasing. So that is also a good research area, maybe for our researcher and for our
Yeah,
academician to take it
yeah.
further. Yeah.
And one area you should focus on when it comes to women's participation is the unpaid work that they actually do.
Yes,
Even in the agriculture
yes,
sector, they are not
yeah,
receiving the true value for the work that they're actually putting in when you're a part of a
yes,
family or something like that. So
right,
subsistence
right.
farming.
Yeah,
So these are kind of issues really need emphasis and research.
true, true, true. Thank you so much, ma'am. So now we are almost running out of time. So if there is no more question, I'm going to close the session for today. I shall give time to Miss Welizo, our PhD scholar, to express a note of gratitude and appreciation. Welizo, you can take your time quickly.
Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I take this opportunity to thank our resource person, Srimati Nayantara Sasikumar, for giving us insightful outlook and perspectives about the state budget 2024 to 2025. Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable time towards this lecture series. Secondly, I would like to thank our moderator, Dr. Rembeni Kikon, Assistant Professor, Nagaland University, Convener, NEA Lecture Series, for chairing this program efficiently. Thank you, ma'am. Thirdly, we are grateful to the Nagaland Economic Association and the Department of Economics, Nagaland University, led by Professor B. Kilangla Jamir, for giving us this platform to come together and learn from each other. Lastly, but not the least, a heartfelt gratitude to all the participants for joining us today, both online and offline. Looking forward to more lecture series in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you
Thanks a
for
lot.
giving us the time.